By evening, they promised the long-awaited coolness, and that was the most important thing in today's news. Otherwise, the feed was flickering with the same trends. Solid toxic garbage. Shooting there, threats here. But everything is stable and even good. After almost a year of living in a negative information field, Max got used to filtering it. Of course, it's hard to truly get used to it. What can I say? It's impossible. But if you constantly let everything through yourself, fear and try to understand, then goodbye sanity. And with his job, that's not allowed. You need stronger nerves there. Aldinsky, like everyone else, tried to live a normal life. But sometimes it hit him. He remembered how a year ago he saw everything completely differently. There were some plans and dreams. He remembered standing at a concert and thinking that finally everything was good for him. And then it started. What started? At some point it became scary, and Max quickly tuned himself that if it really bangs, the main thing is to have time to strike Tony Stark's pose so that it covers him immediately and for sure. With this thought, it became a little easier to live. It's impossible to live in constant fear. Everyone tried to believe in some kind of future. By the end of the workday, it really freshened up outside the window. As usual, Friday hell came. Either trouble on the production servers or problems with the client's head. Max worked hard. So the only desire was to go home and also to pick up the delivery. To pick up. Outside the window, the siren. It was a check of the alert systems. It had happened before and they seemed to have gotten used to it. But every time it made him shudder. Like now, a bad chill ran down his spine. Usually, it started differently. First, they spoke with a voice a couple of times that during the comprehensive technical check. Now, he listened, looked at the colleagues remaining in the office, and realized that no, he hadn't missed it. On their faces, he saw reflections of his own surprise and vague fear. The siren screeched again. Max exhaled with relief. This time, it even shut up quickly. Last time, it wailed for 3 minutes or more. So the day was the same, but here it was polished with an air raid. No way, he was already set for a couple of cans of beer and a quiet evening. In response to his thoughts, the loudspeakers of the alert system crackled unpleasantly, as if someone hit the microphone or moved an invisible plug. The guy looked out the window again. 10th hour, and it's still completely light. He had stayed late today. Again, there was a crackle, followed by a mechanical voice. Attention, this is not a drill. Attention, this is not a drill. After the second repetition, an anxious silence hung for a short time. It was warm in the office, even hot, but Max suddenly felt very cold. No way, Vadim, their tester, said confusedly. No, damn it. No. He grabbed his head, angrily kicked the trash can. No one reacted. Everyone froze in place. Well, who? All pale as a sheet, Katia from the development department and the cleaner who, just 10 minutes ago, was joking and kicking everyone out of the office to go home. Aldinsky's hands were shaking finely. He spoke and fell silent. Outside the window, the sirens sounded again. Started low and dull, grew piercing, and crushed with a wave. The horns overlapped each other, filling all the space. Thoughts, the last departing seconds of ordinary life. It seemed that the siren was getting louder, louder, and louder. Sounds different, Katia whispered. What? Vadim asked angrily. For the first time, they withdrew the estimate, demonstrated to clients what cool projects they have. In the console, they also played on various office team buildings. With trembling hands, he took the remote and turned it on. His heart was pounding wildly in his chest. Behind the glass partition of the meeting room, Katia, Vadim, and the cleaner froze. In the center of the black screen hung a white rectangle with the inscription, "Waiting for a message from the government." A mechanical voice monotonously and lifelessly said that the TV station had interrupted regular broadcasting for an emergency alert to the population. Aldinsky dumbly switched to another federal channel and heard the same synthesized voice. Behind him, a woman sobbed loudly. He silently turned around. Lord, no. How is this possible? Tears streamed down the cleaner's face. She pulled out her phone and ran somewhere. Vadim burst into curses. Katia cried silently, and Max, on unsteady legs, went back to his workplace. He left his phone there. He needed to call his parents. They probably saw it too. Or maybe they hacked it again. That happened too. Then they quickly assured everyone that everything was under control, as always. Thoughts tore like worn canvas, and the siren wouldn't stop. Each new horn destroyed a little more of the familiar, human, and simple. He took the phone, glanced out the window. People behaved differently. Some continued walking, some talked on their mobiles, and some stood paralyzed by the howling of the unrelenting siren. The sky was torn apart by a blinding flash. Max staggered and froze to the floor. Even through the siren, he heard a shrill scream from the street. Aldinsky pressed against the glass. People's gazes were turned toward the lower part of the city. It washed over him with cold. Not cold, real icy panic. Reason refused to believe that everything was happening for real. Stubbornly, it bent its own. This isn't real, just a dream. Nightmare. It's just some accident. There it flared up. Maybe a warehouse exploded. It's not the first time. Below, people screamed. Someone covered their eyes with palms. Someone held out hands and blindly groped in the air. He understood that any attempt to come up with an explanation was doomed. Time stopped. What everyone feared happened, even when they joked that well, then everything would end for sure. Desperately, he didn't want to believe what was happening. Max had no idea how much time was needed for the wave to reach him. OBZH lessons remained somewhere in the beautiful faraway called childhood, and all his thoughts about nuclear war boiled down to a cowardly certainty that he would die in the first minutes in Tony Stark's pose. In the rocket tests and Aaron, the instinct of self-preservation turned out to be stronger. Aldinsky rushed away from the window. Reason tore in half. One part held tightly to the thought that it was all just a dream. Soon the alarm would ring and Max, as usual, would go to work across the city. The other demanded to find shelter to hide, and that part of consciousness didn't plan further. It was like going through levels or stages. First deal with the first threat, then think about others. Max rushed into the meeting room where the TV was still on. The mechanical voice said that a message from the government of the Russian Federation was expected. The guy huddled in the corner, hugged his head with his hands. First, it blew heat. Even inside the building, it felt like stepping out of a plane somewhere in July Cairo or in hell. The shock wave covered him in a few seconds. The building shuddered heavily. The earth itself groaned from the weight. For a moment, it seemed that everything would collapse. A little more and it's the end. But Max wasn't dying yet. Everything around rumbled and thundered. Something sprinkled and fell on him, but he couldn't force himself to open his eyes. He curled up in the corner and waited for what would happen first. The wave would pass, or the building wouldn't withstand and collapse with him. In the noise, a thin ringing wedged in. The glass partition walls burst. It trembled heavily once more, and everything fell silent. Aldinsky opened his eyes slightly. For a few moments, he sat in deafening. Messages from the government. He saw white noise. The sounds of the siren came from somewhere far away, where the loudspeakers miraculously survived. He couldn't force himself to get up. Subconsciously, he waited for another blow, another wave, or maybe that someone would finally wake him up, and he would exhale. No, nervously smile. What a dream. But it's normal. Everyone has been on edge for a long time, living in all this. So nuclear war dreams. The main thing is that, in reality, everything is still good. And through the utopian dreams, a terrible thought broke through, pounding like a heartbeat in the hall into consciousness like a siren. Need to leave, need to right now. Maxim forced himself to move with willpower. On the phone, which he still clutched in his hands, no signal. How would he call his parents now? And then he shook his head in angry helplessness. No one to call anymore. They struck the lower part, surely the military plant where they worked. Now there's only scorched earth. The whole city is a common grave. There could still be living people walking, frightened, confused, crushed by the terrible reality. And above, a radioactive shroud was already gathering, ready to cover everyone who managed to survive the first minutes of the nuclear strike. Max stopped his gaze on the plastic bottles of water that had rolled off the table. Yesterday, the office manager had placed them before another in-person meeting. As always, it went wrong. They argued. On Monday, Max was supposed to go to Moscow to continue the conversation offline. And now, Moscow probably doesn't exist anymore. Holding onto the wall, he got to his feet, grabbed the bottles of water, staggered to his desk. Under his sneakers, glass crunched. The electricity wasn't cut off. The corridor lighting worked. Connections apparently no more. Max hurriedly dumped neither Vadim nor Katya. Mentally, he okayed. Maybe they ran away, probably ran away. He was still shaking while he frantically ran around the office kitchen, stuffing backpacks with fitness bars, the local first aid kit. Again, he didn't know why. The answer seemed obvious. To survive. But for what? Everything familiar to him was destroyed. No relatives, no team, no damn projects that seemed so important to him yesterday. Nothing left. Was it worth holding on to life, knowing that it would only get worse? Max knew for sure it wasn't. But he walked down the corridor, knowing he needed to find a stronger shelter before leaving. He looked into the locker room, grabbed someone's left-behind lonely windbreaker, and put it on. The elevators were off. The whole building was lit with evacuation lights. On the stairs, almost no traces of the shock wave. Just plaster cracked here and there, as if it was intended that way. A flight of the designer's thought, not the merciless trace of war. Real, not the one on TV, seemingly close and at the same time far away. On the street, he saw it without embellishment. Everything around was burning. Flames gnawed at buildings and cars mercilessly. Dead bodies. Soot permeated. He saw corpses. On the horizon, above the other buildings, for many kilometers, a huge cloud of dust and gas rose in the shape of a mushroom, like a sentence or the last breath. Its black shadow covered the scorched earth where there was nothing left. Max had seen this before in movies, on YouTube, even on a website you can enter an address. Algorithms will calculate the damage zone anywhere, but only not in real life. But here it is, war. The air was shot through with screams. Invisible bullets. Above, black radioactive rain was gathering. From an abandoned car came a warning in the same mechanical voice. All citizens must proceed to the nearest bomb shelter or find cover and wait for instructions from the government. Emergency response services. Aldinsky laughed angrily. From the heart. To the bomb shelter, then. And where is it? They somehow didn't tell them. Now he has to ask the first person he meets how to get to the bomb shelter? He kept laughing and laughing, choking on the suffocating soot, but still couldn't stop, even understanding that he was wasting precious time that he didn't have anyway. Max wiped the tears that had appeared on his face, went toward the metro station. It's not far here, 10 to 15 minutes. Around was the city of the dead. It burned and screamed with 1,000 voices. Max walked past abandoned cars with shattered windows, past a pontoon shopping center where not a single glass remained intact. At its doors lay a delivery boy in a smoldering pink jacket. His head was covered in blood, his face a solid burn. The dead man looked at the sky, and Ladinsky also raised his head. Above, it was getting darker and darker. And this wasn't the promised summer thunderstorm. 5 minutes and death is already here. This part of the city was saved only because the shock wave came here already on its last breath. Those who were in buildings had a chance to survive. Those caught on the street were blinded and burned. He forced himself to go further, past the spar where survivors were already dragging everything in a row, stepping over corpses. Max quickened his step. The riots would be even scarier than the consequences of the nuclear strike. They are all, in a sense, consequences. When life is threatened, such things come out that you wouldn't even guess. Max turned into a small park. Another 5 minutes, almost straight, and he'll be at the metro. On the station roof, sirens wailed. Here it is, the saving beacon of this damn city, and also the farewell. Emptiness settled in his head. All emotions were burned out by the shock wave. He looked toward the metro. People with bags and screaming children streamed there, with burned faces hastily bandaged with fresh bandages, hunted and frightened, led by one single primal instinct, to survive. They pushed each other, carried away by the human flow. Above, the siren wailed. Below, people screamed. This is probably what the real end of the world sounds like. An endless cry of pain, the agony of dying humanity. He ran to the station. On the square by the metro, cars were burning. A fuel truck engulfed in flames lay on its side. Max inappropriately wondered where it came from. No gas stations, city center after all. The air tasted unpleasantly bitter. Max took a deep breath and immediately coughed from the suffocating mixture of dust and soot. Not far from the doors, he stopped and looked at the square again. On both sides, traffic lights flashed yellow, adding infernal colors to the picture of the end of the world. On the opposite edge, houses smoked, and on the square itself, another scene from hell unfolded. Everyone caught by the explosion in the open was burned and swept away, covered with dust and burning debris, turned everything into bloody black gray. They screamed and moaned. The dead burned out, and the living ran to the station, ignoring others' cries. It's scary to imagine what was happening on the embankment now. On a summer Friday evening, it's all packed. The capital of sunsets, after all. Everyone there got front row seats. Behind the clouds of smoke and dust, the invisible sun was setting. Max thought that perhaps this was the last time he saw the square, the city, and the remnants of his familiar life. While he looked, someone pushed him in the back. "What are you standing for? What are you standing here for?" A tear-stained woman shouted angrily and, holding her bag, rushed to the narrow doors to the station. Max took off his backpack, hugged it tighter, and also went into the human mess. The metal doorways cut the crowd like breakwaters or a meat grinder. The flow swayed like a train derailed. It squealed and screamed, pressing so that you couldn't breathe. Black Friday as it is. Blacker than you can imagine. They ran only not for cheap TVs, but for a reprieve from death. Max was dragged through the doors and carried down the stairs of the passage to the entrance to the station itself. There, the human wave collided from another entrance. He barely didn't fall, tripping over something still alive and howling. He stepped over, and it carried him further, and the scream behind him broke off with a wet sob. They screamed everywhere. Children scared to death and adults the same. Aldinsky saw, pressed to the face. The station was already packed. Max barely squeezed through the overcrowded hall, descended the non-working escalator, swallowed hard seeing an unconscious body at the foot. Maybe fainted, maybe trampled. Aldinsky went out to the platform. Here, radio broadcasting still worked. The mechanical voice kept saying and saying that an alert from the government was expected. He smiled bitterly. Liars as they were, so they remained. Where were you when all this started? Why did the sirens only wail a few minutes before the strike? The light blinked, and the station plunged into darkness. Immediately, screams rang out, as if fears became stronger in the dark. After a few seconds, anxious emergency lighting turned on. The central lamps turned the thick blackness into a trembling twilight. Max squeezed to the edge of the platform and jumped onto the tracks. On the contact rail, hugging himself with his arms, sat a man about his father's age. At the movement, he raised his head and looked at the guy. His gaze was empty and dead. "I wanted to just once and for all," he reported in an indifferent voice. "And these ___ cut off the electricity. They can't do anything normally, nothing." Max didn't answer, only thought that if the guy wanted to die so much, he could have just stayed outside instead of climbing to the station to fry on the contact rail and cause a short circuit. On the other hand, not here to look for any logic. And into the tunnel. Now it won't smear. And if it smears, at some point it will end anyway. The question is only how long he will last and for what. He sat on the concrete and leaned against the wall. Here it smelled of dampness and the typical smell of creosote. No soot, no smoke, even relatively fresh. The human voices quieted a bit. Max sat in the stupor that gripped him. When it let go, he looked around as if reacquainting himself with the new reality. He survived. He didn't know why yet, but he survived. He pulled out his phone from his backpack. The time had just passed midnight. Saturday, day off. Max opened the messenger and turned on the last voice message. "We're going to the dacha on Saturday morning. Come if you want. Dad here threatened to make shashlik." In Mom's voice, wedged in, "He's coming. How many times has he promised to help put up the fence?" The message ended, and the next one automatically started. His own answer. Max Aldinsky from another life promised to come and asked what to bring, and also said that Saturday might not be the best for shashlik. Rain was promised. Max turned off the screen and squeezed the phone hard. Hot and angry tears streamed down his face. By morning, nothing happened. They didn't wait for the promised government message. The rescuers didn't come either. The mechanical voice of the alert system drowned in wheezing. Hours ago, yesterday stopped along with this. Normal life ended. From the tunnels, Max returned to the station, broken and devastated. There, everywhere sat the same exhausted people. Someone slept, someone still trembled and cried, unable to accept the terrible reality. These were no longer pieces of a protracted confrontation that they were sometimes shown on TV. There, people also hid in stations and then returned to the tormented radioactive ash. And those who hid in the metro would die in a stone cage. Max heard arguments about tunnel hermetic gates, whether to close them or not. No one really understood how it worked. No one believed in the possibility of nuclear war. Someone feared dust, someone suffocation. They feared that other people would come from the tunnels. Aldinsky thought that the station is terminal. There are also turnaround and technical tunnels, but no one there. They threatened to extend the line straight to the cable car, even started construction, but there are no stations yet, work just began. No one will come from there. And from the other side, the bridge over the river. You can't cross it now either. If it survived, all protective coatings were blown off. No one in their right mind would go while black rain pours from the sky. From there, only dust could fly in. In the tunnel where there used to be passenger boarding, they closed the hermetic gate, but in the second, they couldn't. They moved it to the middle and then it jammed as if dead. A thought lashed. All this is the reasoning of a rational person. He could think like that sitting in the office, sipping coffee, putting forward a very hypothetical assumption that after a nuclear strike, everyone would try to find shelter, and no one would think of going to the open part of the bridge blown by all winds. Consciousness, as if on purpose, threw back to the last quiet moment when Aldinsky hung like that on a call, drank coffee, and listened to the eternally dissatisfied client. In the background, someone heartily yelled how he hates these meetings and in general, what _ schedules them for Friday at the end of the workday. Now it seemed that it was not yesterday, but many years ago. That was another Max. Aldinsky thought that people would act rationally. And the one who sat in the damp tunnel already thought differently. Driven to despair, without food and water, a person will do anything. What's walking a kilometer in open space for him? Is it scarier to die from radiation sickness than to starve and become food yourself? Max involuntarily shuddered and rubbed his forearms. It was scary. Scary that all his thoughts would sooner or later become reality. Saving himself from heavy reflections, Aldinsky clung to the voices nearby. Mom, let's go home. An 8-year-old girl stubbornly shook her pale mother. Let's go. We can't yet. Without looking at her daughter, the girl whispered quietly with black streaks on her face. I want to eat. And Tatiana Sergeevna said that on Monday everyone should come with crafts. Let's do it instead. I don't like it here. We'll definitely do it. Even quieter, with a breaking voice, the girl answered. Max met haar gees. She sighed intermittently, hugged her daughter. We'll sit a little more and go. Everything will be fine. Aldinsky saw tears rolling down her face. A little lie for the sake of salvation that won't come. Max felt unbearably stuffy on the overcrowded station. There really was nothing to breathe. But more than that, it choked him, suffocating. He wanted to escape, open the doors, break out onto the street, and scream until blood came from his throat, until he just died among the corpses. Nearby, a faulty fluorescent lamp flickered, trembling as if the fading light was cramped in the glass bulb. He covered his face with his hands. This is just panic. You just need to endure it. He touched the wall with his palm, ran it hard over the cladding. Above, the lantern crackled and blinked. Max decided that he needed to go back to the tunnel. There's more space, more air. He rushed into the dark maw of the tunnel. And after a few meters, he realized that because of his panic attack, he went the wrong way in the opposite direction, which led to the unfinished stations. It was safer than the one where the wind from the river howled mournfully. Max burned himself on the empty gazes and trudged back. When he entered the tunnel again, the darkness pressed harder, but here it felt a little calmer. The farther he went from people, the more it poked inside. In the twilight, he imagined a quiet, barely audible sob. Aldinsky listened. Again, it seemed that someone in the dark was abruptly scratching a pencil on paper. After a couple more moments, he realized that what he took for the rustle of a pencil was the sound of trembling, as if someone was breathing intermittently and chattering teeth. Max walked a little more and made out, huddled. He was shaking so that Aldinsky saw how he trembled. See, this isn't my... Osmos prol several steps and threw the backpack on the floor. Going further was already dangerous. In consciousness, in the same fragments, memories swirled again. Still, the phone on the last percentages of charge vibrated. Reminded something that he needed to log into the work server. Vadim said he would be out of touch all weekend. Asked to log in and run the next test. Max tenderly to that. Besides, work is a legitimate reason to take a break from the fuss with the father's fence. This didn't happen. Memory pulled into the past. He remembered the last corporate party at work. The first and last in the middle of all this crap. At first, it seemed inappropriate to have fun. Then they somehow accustomed themselves to the thought that they need to live on. Mashu and Good remember VRO Bioth al Shah through the fun. Some despair broke through, angry. It was like the last time. So it turned out. And Vadim wasn't wrong that he would be out of touch. Everyone will be without it. Where is he now? Where is everyone? Did anyone from his team survive? Dinsky dumbly stared into the twilight in front of him. Voices from the station reached him. Quite close, like a frightened mouse, pressed against the cold wall. Another survivor trembled in the first day of the apocalypse that had come. The city died and shrank to the size of the metro station. The following days were filled with screams and children's crying. Phantom attempts to organize at least some. From the technical premises, they quickly carried out everything that represented the slightest value for further survival. Those who ran here empty-handed suggested collecting all the food in one place. Others, who had supplies, predictably protested. Max felt like an outsider in the brewing, to make a semblance of a small organized society. Together it wasn't so scary. Together one could discern hope, ignoring the almost complete absence of water and food, the closed doors that sheltered them and buried them. While there was someone who promised that everything would be fine, only not on TV anymore. Lucky that there were almost no immoral bastards on the station, and hunger and fear hadn't yet begun their destructive action. They tried to help each other, calm down, when needed, with force. Fortunately, no one on the station tried to make a stronghold of communism so that all who could help those in need. That could have destroyed the fragile balance even earlier. One Dinsky Pro tunnel where they made an improvised infirmary. In another time, he might have been horrified. Now everything seen echoed with a dull realization that yes, that's how it happens. Faces and hands covered in blisters, crusted wounds, torn to shreds bloody clothes, burns bandaged with rags, blind eyes. Painkillers, those who had them, ran out almost immediately. The station's first aid kits were also gutted. Shock pressed stronger than the weight of the whole world. Shock held everyone so as not to turn into beasts. On the third day, arguments began about what to do with the body near the escalator. In the first days, they didn't notice it or didn't want to notice. Then the smell came and they had to do something. They argued for a long time where to put it. Options were two. Carry to the side of the under-construction branch where the tunnels aren't blocked, or drop from the bridge. What if they have to live here further? What if they will grow mushrooms in the tunnels and all sorts? What if assembled from YouTube and post-AP books? Max silently listened to the arguments, then went to his corner again. All his existence now consisted of being in the tunnel and walking to the station to stretch his legs, to remember that he's still alive. Against all odds. A few hours after the arguments, two men wrapped in film and newspapers passed by him. They didn't slipped off yet. After some time, they returned without the makeshift protective gear and with crappy news that all bridges over the river were destroyed by the shock wave. It wouldn't have blown them apart like that otherwise. Apparently, they hit again, not nuclear, while the whole city was dying from horror and the first consequences. Max thought it would give them a little heavy peace, but instead of calm, a storm came. The first step a little further from their shelter caused a new wave of anxious conversations. They grew and grew like an approaching thunderstorm until the roles of abuse didn't, and food. People tried to convince each other that beyond the station doors, there's nothing scary anymore. After all, it struck the lower part, and above there were no massive destructions. The fire passed, and that's it. Even houses weren't demolished. Surely they've already organized first aid points there. Maybe someone already tried to reach them, but they didn't hear. They spoke and didn't believe. No one came. To the gate, they knocked only on the first day, hoping to get into the shelter. Then everything fell silent. As usual, opinions divided again. Some said it fell silent because they left, others because they died. Aldinsky thought again that no one knows anything about the consequences of a nuclear strike. Just nothing. How long will radioactive fallout last? What dose of radiation can you get if you go to the surface right now? A grandfather over 60 told how after Chernobyl on May Day in Kaluga region, ash fell. And that was Chernobyl fire blocks. And here, weapons of mass destruction. And again, everything drowned in disputes. They recalled how people in lead gear cleaned graphite debris from the roof of the nuclear power plant. They survived. And there were pieces of rods scattered. So we have a chance too. The main thing is carefully and quickly, and don't take anything iron. Such a thought was given by a woman who had been to Pripyat a couple of times. Their guide told them about it. While arguing how not to take iron, Max thought again how everyone knows about post-apocalypse from series and a little from Wikipedia, but no one had a clear idea about the duration of the damaging factors. Everyone ran here unprepared, already after the strike itself, when every minute counted. In better times, he himself watched Chernobyl and remembered how they showed the consequences of the invisible and merciless horror that filled the affected area after the destruction of the power unit. In the end, hunger won, and probably the idiotic hope that they would succeed. Faith that somewhere up there, help would definitely come. 6 men wrapped in polyethylene, shoe covers, and somehow obtained cosmetic caps stood resolutely before the hermetic gate. To the station, maybe someone among them felt like that fearless stalker. Max saw a suicide. To go up on the 3rd or 4th day is suicide. With a drawn-out screech, they raised the heavy shutter, and from the other side, it blew suffocating smog. Aldinsky saw how the faces of the first explorers lost resolve, and fear showed clearly, which they drowned in heroic mood. That's how everyone was taught from TV. To believe that we will win. Max always looked at such assurances through a veil of gloomy pessimism, and it hadn't let him down yet. He wanted to believe it would let him down now, but it only rooted deeper in consciousness. While seeing off the departing, humane thing quickly where groceries they discussed what can and cannot leak. Take more. When you see help, say we're here. You'll come back. Read. They left. The heavy door descended again and cut off the survivors from the world. The agonizing wait began. Everyone already existed beyond human capabilities, but now nervousness grew like a snowball. Max habitually hid from the crowd in the tunnels. There, in the Pamit, the same guy sat. He looked like a cat thrown out at a bus stop, and he sits, not understanding where his familiar warm home went. Aldinsky thought that the poor guy had a prolonged shock state. Or maybe he had something wrong with his psyche, and that's why it hit him even harder than everyone else. Now you can't figure out who's mentally healthy and who's not. No healthy ones left at all. You should walk a bit, Max said. Muscles will stiffen, especially if you sit curled up like that. I walk, his strange neighbor answered barely audibly. Sometimes. Aldinsky smiled and shook his head. Sometimes. They all walked against physiology. You can't argue. They even allocated a special place for everyone. Max rummaged in his backpack and pulled out a bottle of water. He threw it. In life, everyone became for themselves, but he wanted to preserve the remnants of humanity, at least its pale shadow. The guy looked at him incredulously. Thank you, he whispered and greedily pressed to the bottle. He didn't drink everything. Max saw on his face how much effort it took to stop, but he saved, hid the remnants in a bright yellow backpack, and quieted down again. Only stretched his legs. The problem came from where they didn't expect. More precisely, everyone understood that sooner or later the emergency lighting would die. Batteries aren't eternal. But everyone preferred to think about later than sooner. Turned out something in between. The light blinked and went out. The station's darkness immediately filled with voices. Even from here, Max heard someone suggesting to look for an electric generator on the station. Yeah, generator, and then craft armor and go for supplies, shooting ghouls and mutants. While Max inwardly fumed with irony at the nameless advisor with a baggage of knowledge from computer post-AP games. His neighbor in the dark quietly whined. This distracted Aldinsky from meaningless sarcasm. Hey, he called. How are you there? Don't be afraid, battery's probably discharged. The guy didn't answer. Max heard his intermittent breathing. Soon those guys will return, maybe bring something, or the hermetic door. Shutter was meaningless for the whole 10. They wouldn't get any light, only a corpse stench, but Max knew how to speak convincingly. It was part of his job. Come here if you're not afraid. In the dark, there was movement. Aldinsky heard steps. After a few seconds, the boy sat next to him, shoulder to shoulder. Max, he introduced himself. Artem, his neighbor, answered quietly. They returned light to the station pretty quickly. Of course, no one went to look for a non-existent electric generator and to him a protein idea. Thieves broke the table in the technical room. Human anger was enough to break it into splinters. In the center of the station, they kindled a tiny fire and slowly fed the remnants of the table to the fire, little by little, just to maintain the spark of light. There was very little light, like from a lighter, but still it was light. With it, it immediately became calmer. Max with Artem approached closer to the station, sat on the floor. The boy didn't step away from him. Well, fine if it makes him calmer and it won't hurt Dinsky. In the end, to encourage and support was recently part of his usual actions. To convince that everything will be fine, even if he himself didn't believe it. When the first explorers returned, hoping for the best became both easier and harder. Because they came not empty-handed. They carried bags with provisions and canisters with water. And harder because to the question where is help, everyone only looked at each other confusedly. There was none. No first aid points, no police, no army, nothing. Only a dead city with decomposing. Who survived waited in buildings. Stores are looted and smashed, but something can still be found. Max listened as the return told that the first days were the scariest. Radioactive emissions spared no one. People on the station have been sitting for the fourth day, and up there, those who caught a lethal dose of radiation are already done. They saw such, seemingly still a person but seemingly already not. A living corpse, just like in Chernobyl. But here it's simpler for them. Only next time take more people and stock up, and just in case if you have to fight back. Now only here on the station are their own, and all others are strangers. And for their own, too, need to watch so they don't freak out. Aldinsky caught himself on a strange and inappropriate association. In distant childhood, they with the boys told scary stories without light, with one flashlight. Whoever screams first is a coward. He felt like such a boy who trembles at stories. Only that boy knew that the horrors told would disappear if you turn off the old father's flashlight and turn on the light. And Max understood that horrors are now their life. And despite the encouraging talks that they survive the worst is still ahead. Everyone lived waiting for rescue. No one came, but they found explanations for this. Bridges destroyed, roads blocked, many victims, of course. Resources aren't enough for everyone at once. But they'll wait. Only 8 days passed. In that time, they organized a couple more sorties up, cleared corpses from passages, dragged everything that could be useful from above, even found a couple of barrels for fire somewhere. Some left and didn't return. Max heard that someone decided to wait for help in their neighborhoods nearby. Dinsky had nowhere to go. From his house in the lower part, surely only ruins left. He sat on the station. Amazing how impossible and unbearable conditions in ordinary life suddenly became habitual, and how people here no longer just survived in a temporary shelter but settled in. Death didn't bypass them either. There was one man among them about whom you could immediately say he wasn't a survivor. In a hospital, they would patch him up. Ordered. They said he fell on a rebar. Seemingly not a particularly deep wound, but heat and dirt did their thing. This time, to take him out of the tunnel, they went to the bridge, almost a kilometer under the tunnel, carried out to the street further from the station, put in an abandoned car and left. To the dead, it's all the same. Once they had to worry. The group was long not returning. When they went up the non-working escalator and approached the broken doors of the station entrance, they saw the reason. It was raining, not black mixed with ash, ordinary summer rain that brings invisible death. And the group had to wait in a destroyed eatery beyond the square. Seemingly a stone's throw to the station, but no one wanted to risk their skin in vain. That day, they brought an old battery-powered radio to the station, where they found such a rarity. They tried for a long time to catch at least some message, but heard only crackling interference. But even that didn't prevent hoping that help someday. In the next sortie, Max went too. When he started getting ready, Artem approached him. He didn't dissuade, only looked with anxiety. The boy had finally become his ward. Aldinsky managed to learn that Artem is 17 years old, half his age. He went to a special school from our Ogobisha. He tried to carefully find out why in a special school. Artem only shrugged and said he doesn't know. Aldinsky didn't know either. Temka looked and talked like an ordinary schoolboy, except he was very quiet and timid. He couldn't even go for food alone. Approaches people and stands silently until someone asks or Max comes. Artem seemed to try to be as unnoticed as possible, but in survival conditions that only harms. Would die and no one would notice until the smell goes. But that could be consequences of psychological trauma. Among them was a woman who no longer spoke. Her husband vainly tried to reach her, but she completely closed in on herself. And before the strike, by his words, everything was fine, like everyone else. I don't buy. He thought to take him with, but then abandoned the idea. Up there, you can run into other survivors. There were already skirmishes. And no need for him to see what it turned into. He'll have time to see if help reaches them after all. Everything will be fine, Max said encouragingly. Where didn't disappear about what disappeared already, and went up. A strange feeling gripped him. He simultaneously prepared for the worst. To see an extinct and destroyed city full of decomposing corpses and garbage, and at the same time subconsciously hoped that right now finally special services cars, emergency response or military would appear and take them to other survivors. With this thought, Max left the station and for the first time saw the city after the strike. Unaccustomed, it hurt the eyes. The sky was covered with dense clouds, but the light breaking through them was enough to blind people who hid in the dark underground for more than a week. The mechanical clock showed 4 a.m. Stupid to hope that the dying city lives by the usual schedule and they won't meet anyone. But still early was a bit calmer. Along the laid route, some places were already completely looted, somewhere food remained. Everything useful was thrown into backpacks and bags. In the shopping center, there were their own rules. Below, where there was a huge grocery supermarket, people firmly settled. They didn't even let them close to the entrance. Locals stood armed with whatever and ready to defend their own. No one climbed on, went up. Everywhere everything scattered, sometimes dead bodies came across. Max almost got used to the smell of new life. Rotting garbage, corpses, human waste, unwashed bodies. In the pharmacy, among overturned shelves, he found a box of wet wipes and poured into the backpack batteries for a flashlight, clean clothes, another blanket, raincoats. In a store with all sorts of small things, Max picked up an album for drawing and a pack of pencils from the floor, also shoved into the backpack for Artem. When they got a flashlight, the schoolboy often sketched something. The art book and the rustling sound was just the rustle of lead on paper, not the tremor of a deathly frightened. Parking lot. There they found a car on the move. Keys hid in the hand of a corpse under a wriggling cover of maggots. Roads are clogged, but somehow you can drive closer. Pity that the car is probably one-time pleasure again. It was already like that. Returned on a car, left seemingly in a secluded place but didn't save. Didn't steal but broke the windows and punctured the tires. The broken windows theory now applied to the whole city. In the parking lot, Aldinsky walked between abandoned cars. Not far from the entrance, behind a black SUV, he saw a man lying on his stomach in a dirty and torn police uniform. One of his hands was awkwardly twisted and hidden under the body. On the back of his head, a deep wound as from a strong blow. Skull smashed. In another time, it might have made Aldinsky nauseous, but now it was time to remember, let's add this is the norm. Such is their norm now in the realities of the end of the world. But still, he stopped a bit not from the blood and hairbrains. The corpse was completely fresh. Aldinsky turned the body on its back and saw that the policeman clutched a gun in his hand.
Max hesitated.
He once went to a shooting range, shot pneumatics and combat, only didn't think he'd have to apply his knowledge in such practice. Aldinsky unclenched the dead man's hand and pulled out the weapon, put the gun on safety and threw into the backpack. He decided not to tell about his find. For his own sanity he could still vouch, but for others on the station, no. The ironic thought caught up. That's probably how each of them reasoned.
Max.
Searched and now uses as a cart from the supermarket. He, breaking his convoy. People looked around vigilantly. Everyone was ready to fight off the loot if someone coveted it. On the way, Aldinsky saw a plumbing store sign, thought that he would probably sell his soul now to climb into a bath or take a shower or at least plunge into a lake not contaminated with radioactive fallout. In the morning, such simple things became inaccessible. Max more than once thought that one could try to leave the city, to his parents' house in the region, and each time he bumped into further action. Leave and then, maybe there is non-poisonous water, roof overhead, and then where to get food? Go to the forest and shoot animals with a slingshot? Or wait until someone comes and kills him himself? and in the depths smoldered a tiny spark of hope that sooner or later military must appear and evacuate everyone to a safe place. Fear of missing the chance to return to a semblance of civilization also held firmly in the metro. Trouble came on the 10th day after the conditional knock. On the station, they raised the Hermo gate. Then, from the darkness of the passages came those whom no one expected. Max heard screams from afar, jumped from his place. Next to him, like a shadow, Artem immediately grew and looked at him frightened. While Ladinsky frantically figured out, the twilight filled more and more with sounds of struggle, yells, and voices. "Now we'll see what's there," he whispered through his teeth. From the station, a shot thundered, and Max flinched, pressed against the tunnel wall, and pulled Artem after him. "Quiet," he commanded hastily, pulled the gun from the backpack. Hands trembled, and he was going to shoot. Max took a few cautious steps forward, looked at the station, and froze. Chaos reigned there, screams mixed with blows and curses. Twilight was torn by. All climbed and climbed to the station, like water into a breached dam. Blinded with flashlights, beat and shot. "Save ammo," sounded a voice. Aldinsky saw the speaker and went cold. He understood what that strange clothes was: prisoner's uniform. Opposite his uni there was a pre-trial detention center. From here, they with groupmates all laughed that they're the life cycle of a person on a couple square meters. Church, uni, factory, prison, and behind it cemetery. Max went cold and froze in disgusting stupor. How now? Where? He with horror realized that now he's much scarier than when he ran to the station right after the nuclear strike. He felt that he was nauseous, breathed intermittently. Can't panic. He looked at the convicts who herded people like cattle and again inhaled shortly. Can't panic, impossible. Those who tried to resist lay on the station beaten and shot. The rest ran into the tunnel, but there was a dead end. Closed hermetic gate. Max thought that maybe somehow slip past them and jump out to the station vestibule. Immediately shook his head. Won't work. This isn't stealth in a game, this is scary reality. The dark hall filled with new owners and their survival rules. Don't kill the living here. What the you looking at? Want to live? I want 2 hands off such a luku corpses to the street dump next to the entrance so no one sticks. Shrill squeal, cries of pain and fear, crying, loose laughter, blows, curses. Here the stash will be better. Quick to hours in the shopping so all climb here. Let them finish the living these while enough. Max froze, pressed into the wall. Everything as if happening to him. Here. Approaching steps. Someone came to the edge of the platform and shone into the tunnel. And who do we have here huddling on the tracks? Jumped down a man. The left side of his face as if melting down. It was crossed by strips of old scars. In hands he held a piece of metal pipe. Blood dripped from it. He shouted, "I can't even YH come here, boys." The healthy half of the face distorted in a grin. The other remained motionless. Another one quickly approached him. "What the you here, NSH, take drag them both. What, scared or what? You watch your mouth now for SY here with blood all." Dinky deeply inhaled. Behind his back, took the gun off safety. And he didn't even know if there were cartridges, and even more didn't know if he'd hit. In former times, he thought if he'd be able to shoot a person if necessary. And even then, he couldn't give himself a definite answer. And now he didn't doubt. Max didn't see people in front of him, only non-people and cannibals. He pulled the trigger. A shot thundered. The ZK threw aside, and he grabbed his shoulder. Aldinsky as if stuck a burning stick into an anthill, only instead of ants he stirred up a pack of feral and rabid dogs. Max shot again, forcing the convict to collapse on the tunnel floor, moved the gun to the second frozen at the platform edge, and pulled the trigger again. Only one shot sounded. Then he heard only click. Cartridges ended. K on the platform heavily fell into the tunnel. Somewhere in the station depths yelled, "What the hell?" Aldinsky immediately turned to Artem. "Run," he said, and immediately heard the same command. "Come on after him." Max with Artem rushed into the tunnel past the half-closed door, and SNU beat Ricky and FNAEHU feet. When the voices quieted, Max slowed the run and turned to Schakinglo. It lived in NM all the last year. From that very day when all started, it became quieter then louder again. Sometimes he deliberately muffled it because otherwise he'd go mad. But even suppressed, it didn't go away, waited for its hour. And that came on Friday with sunset over the confluence of two rivers when the sky exploded with a blinding flash. The city simply evaporated with the screams of people that forever remained buried under the rubble of buildings, with burned alive, with dead or still dying, with each taken life and each broken dream. Hopelessness covered everything with black wings, spread a shroud. There will be no future, no graves. One solid picture, apocalyptic. Froze mutilated wandered ghosts who didn't yet know that they too are dead. And with each step died humanity. Max wanted to believe that somewhere it's different, but couldn't. Didn't work. All faith and hope in something light stayed under the thickness of radioactive ash. Before he tried, thought the protracted conflict would be resolved differently. Convinced himself that one way or another it would end and they could return to previous life, survive without fear's weight for the next year. And instead they heard the voices of their killers. "Let's go further," he commanded. "They're only the bridge," Artem whispered audibly. "So we'll go to the bridge." Temka incredulously shook his head, helplessly looked at Max. "Please," in Omyucut begged for another miracle. And Aldinsky had no more left. "Nowhere else," quietly said Max. "Society collapsed once during the strike. This last shadow was swept away by ZKS." Through bitter anger about Cha, Artma lips trembled in a pale semblance of approving smile. The guy sighed intermittently and Doomed nodded. The dark tunnel saw them off with the echo of non-humans' voices that walked behind. To the bridge, not close. There was time to imagine that they just go somewhere very fast, sometimes breaking into a run, and no pursuers. They Cha doida to the bridge and will be Noma. Built plans how to survive them. Yes, he remembered that bridges bombed, but calculated suddenly managed to get to the automobile canvas above, and then escape anywhere. About those people who remained on the station he tried not to think. Remembered the phrase that the time will come when the living will envy the dead. Maybe from some book on religion. Or maybe from a song at all. These times really came. Those who died immediately were actually very lucky. From the thought, what will be with those left for food, at those it became terribly bad. "Here they come on here, come on, catch them quicker." All his plans swept voices they caught up behind flashed flashlight light. Quick, Max with pulled Artem after himself. Naked gloom dissipated into twilight and then surrendered under the onslaught of dim light. After several days of darkness, unaccustomed zealous eyes. Here at light at the end of the tunnel, they ran out to the transfer part. All sky was covered with full gray veil. Sun still long won't break through the man-made shroud which people created with their own hands on the bridge was wind. Max quickly went to the destroyed span and cursed behind again. Voices sounded. They won't have time, nowhere to go, nowhere there or in a trap, pressed with fear, and led to the very edge from this cliff. Aldinsky looked at the mutilated city, and the same mutilated lives. Black ruins, lower part of the city, solid scorched desert, icorny skeletons of buildings, burned out frames of cars, fused human remains under layer with smell decomposition. In the dead city, all louder sounded ugly voices. Knows nowhere to run, knock him ammo, still waste. ZK grinned widely and threateningly. Protruded back and powerlessly turned to Artem. Heart tore from hopelessness. Stupid, how everything scary wrong, such simply shouldn't ever exist. Everything they see result merciless mistake. Someone decided that so will be better and someone couldn't stop. Artem with longing in voice called Dinsky. Temka, nowhere us to go, only forward. You swim, no right, we jump, get somehow, and their weight evacuation. You only not afraid. Okay. Guy looked at him full horror eyes and didn't believe not a single his word. This all he asked? Max weakly shrugged and bitterly smiled. Maybe, and not all, if remain places where didn't reach SME, if on all sides borders find those who despite anything preserve in themselves remnants humanity, if people turn out more than humans, if radioactive rain can extinguish flame. Hatred. Aldinsky extended hand and Artem grabbed it, trembling palm first, uncertain. As M saw that he closed his eyes. Dead city merged with black river below, cold wind became soothing water. Maybe really not yet all, but they not know further future. No.